Hey guys, what is up? Welcome back to another video here on What's Wildlife. As you can see today, guys, I do have a review on the Canon 100-400 Mark II lens. This is an absolutely phenomenal lens that I am totally in love with. This is a Canon lens that was released all the way back in 2014 and is still used all around the world by professional wildlife photographers today. A really phenomenal piece of glass, very sharp, very versatile, and it's just honestly a great piece of glass for its price. And this does cost around $2,400 brand new today, but you can get it for cheaper used. Not too much cheaper, honestly, you know, maybe a little bit under $2,000 used, but still, you know, it's a pretty darn expensive lens, but it is worth it. And you know, relative to other lenses, pretty darn cheap, to be honest, and definitely great value for the money that you are paying. And before I jump into this, I do want to quickly say that just like all of my other camera gear reviews, this is a review from the point of view of a wildlife photographer. The points that I'm going to be talking about in this video are going to be points that are relevant to wildlife photography, and this is going to be a review video for people looking to buy this lens for wildlife photography. And jumping straight in, let's first talk about the sharpness of this lens. This is a sharp lens. I don't want to say this is as sharp as, you know, like a 600 prime or a 500 prime or, you know, something like that, but this is a sharp lens. This is a very sharp telephoto lens. And, you know, like I said, I can't put it up there with primes. I'm not going to go that far, but it's pretty darn close. It's barely noticeable in a loss of sharpness between, you know, like a prime lens and a lens like this. For a zoom lens, this is the sharpest that I've ever seen personally. You can see through some of the example images here, even when you're shooting at higher ISOs, a lot of these images you see here were shot at, you know, over 1,000 ISO, still maintains great detail, and you can just see each individual strand of fur when I zoom in on some of these animals. And, you know, detail in the eye, just phenomenal amount of detail maintained by this lens. And no matter what you're shooting, this is going to capture it in detail as long as you're, you know, focusing on the animal correctly and, you know, all of that. So very sharp. The only thing, a very slight thing that I have a problem with this lens is, and this is a thing with all zoom lenses, not just this lens, so I can't specifically pick on this one. This is a problem with all zoom lenses, but in this one's case, at 400 millimeters at f5.6, which is the minimum aperture you can go at, at 400 millimeters, it's a little bit soft. It's not soft. I don't want to say it's soft. It's sharp as a tack, but it's softer than if you stop up to 6.3 or 7.1. It's a little sharper when you stop up a little bit, and I've actually noticed it varies between copies. Like the copy that I rented this summer was actually sharper at 5.6 than this copy that I actually own is, which is unfortunate. I wish it was the other way around. But it's very minor. It's barely even noticeable. You have to really be pixel peeping to even tell that this one lacks a little bit in sharpness compared to the other. But just generally at 5.6, this lens is a little bit softer than it would be at 6.3 or 7.1. But, you know, like I said, that's typical of zoom lenses, so it's to be expected. But it would be nice, obviously, in the perfect world, if this lens were not that way, if this was perfectly sharp at 5.6. But it's so minor that it's barely even noticeable. You have to have shot with it for a while and be looking for that kind of thing to even notice it. So that would really be the only minor complaint that I would have about sharpness on this lens, but just don't let that get you thinking this is not sharp. This is a sharp lens. Either way, this is a very sharp lens. The next thing that I like about it is the versatility. From 100 to 400 millimeters, there's so much range for shooting in there. You can get, depending on how far away the animal is, you can get at 100 millimeters, nice environmental portraits of the animal. You know, you can get it maybe as just a small, you know, maybe 1/6 of your frame is filled with the animal and the rest is the environment. You can also zoom all the way in and get a real nice tight portrait of the face in some cases as well. So it's got a lot of versatility in that way, where you can shoot a number of different types of wildlife shots all on one lens. And, you know, if the animal starts out, you know, way on far away and is coming closer to you, then you have that entire 300 millimeters of shooting range that you can zoom in and out there. So you can start all the way at 400 and get those shots. As the animal comes closer, zoom out, all the way to 100 and have that entire 300 millimeter range to get the shots that you want. Which is not the case on a prime lens. You know, if you have a 600 f4, you're shooting at 600 and that's it. I mean, you can put on a teleconverter and shoot farther, but if the animal comes close and you're just out of luck, you're not shooting anymore. So that's one of the huge benefits of this lens, is you have that versatility from 100 all the way up to 400 with a total of 300 millimeters of range that you can shoot at, and that is very, very nice. But this is also versatile in another way. This can also be used as a macro lens because it focuses very, very close, and you know, obviously you can use that for macro photography for other things if you're interested in that, flowers or whatever else. But like I said, this is a wildlife photography review. So the thing about this lens that comes in very, very handy when shooting macro is that you can get shots of small insects and different things like that and get really sharp, really detailed shots of these animals, because this lens can focus so close that, you know, you can zoom all the way out to 400, get really close to that animal and focus without, you know, with most big lenses, you have to be far away for it to be able to focus. With this lens, you can get pretty darn close, focus, and get that shot of, you know, a small insect and really get some awesome macro shots. So it's also versatile in that way because you can get, you know, your larger animals, far out telephoto shots, but you can also get down to the smallest little frogs or insects with macro shots with this lens as well. So it's definitely very impressive in its versatility in a number of different ways. So that is awesome about this lens, and just also the different settings that you have on this thing. I mean, you've got, for one, definitely my favorite setting is the stabilizer. The stabilizer on this thing, you've got right here, you can switch on and off, and you also have 3 different stabilizer modes. We'll get to those in a minute. But the stabilization in this thing is 4 stops. Which basically means you can bring shutter speed down 4 whole stops and still have stabilized images, still have sharp images because of the stabilization inside the lens. So really good stabilization in this thing, and you can see in some of the clips that I filmed here that I've been showing, you know, it's stabilizer on versus stabilizer off. There's so much more shake without that stabilizer on. So beneficial to have those 4 stops of internal stabilization in this lens. But you also have, like I said, the different stabilization modes. You have a switch down here on the side also that you can switch between those 3 different modes and use each different one. So on mode 1 here on the first setting is just basically standard image stabilization. This is for your stationary or slow moving subjects. You know, you may have a deer walking through a field and then it stops and pauses for a minute. Then it keeps walking. A scenario like that, and you're shooting that scenario as it walks and when it stops and as it continues to walk, that's where you would use the image stabilizer mode 1. It's for slow moving subjects or stationary subjects. So that's where you would use that one, and it would just give you 4 stops of stabilization, like I said, in the lens. But if you're shooting, let's say, birds in flight, and you know, this is an animal that's flying fast across the sky, and you're panning with that animal, what the second stabilizer mode is made for is specifically that, panning horizontally. So switch it over to stabilizer mode 2, and you can pan with a bird in flight or maybe with a cheetah, and you know, you can be shooting that whole time, and it's going to stabilize it and keep your viewfinder and your picture is going to be kept on that animal, and it's not going to be wobbling up and down or anything. It's going to be panning with it side to side, and it's not going to be accounting for those, you know, micro movements up and down. You don't notice them when you're shooting, but when you're at this far of a millimeter, this far zoomed out, they're going to be very evident in your photos and videos. But this panning stabilization mode, stabilizer mode 2, helps with that and takes that up and down movement out and just allows for you to pan smoothly. So that's very, very nice about the second stabilizer mode on this camera. And then the third stabilizer mode here is actually the one that I really never use. It's basically just a battery saver mode. So if you're in a scenario where you don't have the ability to charge your camera batteries, or you're just really trying to conserve that camera battery, you can turn it onto this mode and it doesn't stabilize the shot until you actually take the shot. So let's say that I've got this on, whatever it may be. Maybe it's a bird in flight, maybe it's a stationary deer. And I'm shooting through my viewfinder as I'm looking at it. The shot won't be stabilized, so I'll see a lot of movement up and down, left and right, just from the micro movements of my body. Like I said, when it's magnified at 400 millimeters, those are very evident. So when you're shooting that, you're going to see that movement. But when it actually takes the shot, when you press the shutter down, it's going to stabilize that shot, so that movement won't be a problem in the shot. So as opposed to stabilizer mode 1, where when you're looking through the viewfinder, it shows the stabilization, and when you take a shot, the shot is stabilized. In the case of stabilizer mode 3, when you're looking through the viewfinder, it's not going to be stabilized because your camera is saving that battery and not showing you that. But when you actually take the shot, it's going to be stabilized. So you're still going to come away with that nice, sharp, clean shot. So those are the stabilizer modes, and those are very, very helpful on this lens as well to switch between, especially modes 1 and 2. You know, for birds in flight, that stabilizer mode 2 is just so handy and so much better, and so much more helpful than mode 1. And I'm really glad they included those different modes. That's, again, another layer of versatility added to this lens. You've got the versatility to shoot stabilized stationary and slow-moving subjects, but also the ability to pan and shoot fast-moving, running, or flying subjects with this lens, with the other stabilizer mode. So very, very nice in that. And you obviously have the switch here that switches from autofocus to manual focus as well. Pretty self-explanatory. When you have it on AF, it's using the autofocus. When you have it on MF, it's using manual focus. Pretty darn simple there. And then on the top here, you do have another switch that goes from full focus to infinity focus. And basically what this means, when you have it on the full focus switch, it will focus anywhere in the camera's focusing range. It'll focus as close as it's physically possible for this lens to focus, or it will focus out as far as it can possibly focus. It'll, you know, your camera can search throughout that entire range for focus. When you switch it over to the infinity mode, what this actually does is allows for a faster autofocus system when you're shooting subjects that are far off. So in a case where you don't need to focus on something close up, in the case of this lens, it is 3 meters, which is why it has that little 3M up there. The first 3 meters within the frame, your camera won't even search for focus in those first 3 meters past the lens. It's only going to search for focus beyond 3 meters. So this is helpful because when you're trying to shoot something and you're trying to get focus on an animal, that's a whole entire range within the focusing range that your camera is eliminating and not trying to search for focus during. So it's going to catch focus faster on your far out subject. So if you're shooting at a subject far out, you might want to switch it over to that mode, and your camera is going to be a little bit faster grabbing focus on that subject because it's not searching for focus close up. It's only searching for it further out. So I hardly ever use that mode because, to be honest, the autofocus in this lens is so lightning fast, even in the full mode, that there's really not a huge need to use that mode. But, you know, in some scenarios, it really may come in handy to switch over to that and have a little bit faster focus from this lens. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is probably my favorite feature of this lens, and that is the smooth to tight zoom ring. Now, that sounds crazy, but this feature is so ridiculously helpful. Basically what this is when you twist this ring, when you rotate this ring, it allows for a smoother zooming of the lens. It allows for it to, you know, zoom in and out easier, more quickly, more rapidly, and more smooth. Or it allows for, if you want to switch it over to tight, a harder time zooming in and out, and it zooms out slower. And as you know, you have to put a little bit more pressure and pull to be able to zoom in and out. What this is really, really helpful for is in those situations where you want to be able to zoom in and out fast, but at the same time, you want to have a lens that you can carry and it's not going to creep on you. It's not going to, you know, slip down. So what you can do is, if you have it in tight mode, like I do right now, you can see that is not slipping at all. That zoom it's all the way up in there. My lens is not creeping down, and you know, it's not zooming out on me because I have it on that tight mode. Now I can still use this and zoom in and out, but it's not creeping on me at all if I'm carrying this lens. Then if I switch it over to smooth, you can see that it does creep. You can see that there. I'm not touching it. So I'm going to zoom it all the way in, and you can see it actually does creep when you have it over on smooth. So the downside of that is that you want to be able to shoot, you know, with a lens like this that you can zoom in and out very fast. You want to have that versatility on your zoom lens, you know, super fast there. But you don't want it to be a zoom lens that creeps. And this has always been a problem on zoom lenses because they're so, you know, heavy because they're telephoto that they creep a lot if you have them, you know, have a nice smooth zoom in and out function. And Canon has solved that with this lens by including the smooth tight ring. If you want to be able, you know, if you're shooting a subject and you want to be able to zoom in and out fast, you can just roll it over to smooth and you can zoom right in and out super fast. But then let's say that you are walking around with your lens and you don't want it to creep on you, and then, you know, you accidentally hit it on a rock and break your multi-$1,000 lens. Well, Canon solved that. You switch it over to tight, and that's no longer a problem. It's not going to creep on you at all. It's going to stay right up in there. That is easily my favorite feature of this lens because it allows for that rapid fast zoom, but also prevents any creep and prevents you from accidentally damaging your lens because it was creeping down on you, and then, you know, you accidentally hit it on something or something like that. So, you know, typically what a manufacturer would do would put it right on the borderline to where It's not quite creeping, but it's very, very close, and it can zoom out, you know, pretty fast. It's got a pretty nice, smooth zoom in and out function, but not as good as this. They usually try to place it middle of the road, but on a lens like this, with this feature that Canon's implemented, you can have the best of both worlds with that smooth, tight zoom ring. So I really, really appreciate that. That is just something Canon didn't have to include on this lens. They went the extra mile and did include, and like I said, that is probably my favorite feature of this lens. And then just a few more things on this lens. It's also got a nice solid build. You know, this is a hefty lens. It's got nice metal up here. This rubber is very tough. It's not gonna, you know, you can't scratch it or break it very easily. This is not plastic at all. This is a heavy, nice build. It's got a metal mount. Just really a solid build here. Obviously, a lens like this is fragile anyways, but overall, because it's got such a solid build, it's not going to break very easily if you do drop it. And just generally the wear and tear on it, you know, from you zooming it in and out, throwing it in and out of a camera bag, you know, switching on the different modes, and you know, maybe you've got it in the seat next to you in your car and you're driving around, you slam on the brakes and it flies forward and hits the dashboard. All these different things that could, you know, have some real wear and tear on your lens. This lens holds up against very, very well because it is such a solid build. So this is a lens that's going to last you for a very, very long time because of that. I mean, there are people, you know, like I said, that bought this all the way back in 2014 and are still shooting on it. Because not only, you know, like the sharpness and all the other quality things I've talked about, but also because the build quality is just so good that it's going to last you a long time. And then as far as weight, it's not super heavy and it's relatively small. For 400 millimeters, pretty darn small lens. I mean, if you showed me that, in most cases, I would not think this is a 400 millimeter lens. I would say maybe 300. But this being a 400 millimeter lens in this size and this weight, pretty darn good. I mean, I'm not going to say it's light. It's decently heavy, but it's not as heavy as many lenses out there, and not near as heavy as many other 400 lenses even are out there. So solid build, great size, great weight, and you know, a really good lens to handhold. This is a really good 400 millimeter handhold lens. I rarely shoot on a tripod with this. You can handhold this lens pretty darn easy, which is very, very nice because it is pretty lightweight and pretty small. So that's very beneficial about this lens. And then the last benefit, or the last pro that I want to talk about of this lens, is the price. Can't beat the price on this lens. I know it is $2,400. That's a hefty price tag, but for a 400 millimeter 5.6 lens with the level of sharpness that this has and all the different features that I've already explained to you, you know, that this lens has, you can't beat this price. I mean, typically, you know, a 400 lens, for example, a 400 2.8 lens, obviously better aperture there, but still gonna run you, you know, $10,000 almost, or maybe more, and depending on where you buy from, what brand, what model. It's gonna be around $10,000 is the point. Or like 600 f4 is, you know, 10,000 plus, up to 13, 14, 15,000. But a lens like this that is nearly as sharp as those doesn't quite get down to f4 or f2.8. You know, you have to shoot it at 400 at 5.6, which isn't necessarily too fast of an aperture, but it's decently fast. For a lens like that at 400 millimeters, shooting at 5.6 with this level of sharpness and everything, for $2,400, this lens is a steal. This is an absolute steal. And, you know, if you're looking to upgrade from your entry-level camera gear to get into better wildlife photography gear, more professional wildlife photography gear, this is your entry point. I mean, this lens is perfect for that. And it's expensive. It's a hefty price tag. But if you're looking to get more serious and start producing some professional images, this lens is the perfect entry point to not have to spend, you know, $10,000 and still get an awesome lens that can produce awesome photos for relatively cheap, like I said. So the price on this is awesome. Even though it's expensive comparatively to larger lenses and other, you know, telephoto lenses, it's cheap, if that makes sense. So overall, love this lens, but there is one con. The only con that I really have about this lens is the variable aperture. I really don't like variable aperture lenses because in the case of this lens at 100 millimeters, you're shooting at f4.5. When you zoom all the way out to 400, you're shooting at 5.6. And the issue with that is that if I happen to have my camera, you know, all my settings locked in, I'm shooting at f4.5 and, you know, I've got my exposure right and everything. And then I want to zoom in on this animal and get a tight face shot. You know, I've maybe been shooting environmentals. I decide, you know what, let me zoom in, get a tight face shot on this animal. What's happened is my aperture has changed from 4.5 to 5.6. So my exposure has changed. And if I don't compensate for that, you know, when I'm shooting this animal and I'm focused on getting composition and focus and all these other things, sometimes you forget to compensate for that. You forget that your aperture is changing when you're zooming in, and then you have an underexposed image. So I really, really don't like that variable aperture. It causes you to miss shots in a lot of cases because or not miss shots necessarily, but underexpose or overexpose your shots because of the zoom, and you sometimes just forget that your aperture is changing and that you need to adjust accordingly. So that's the one con, if any, that I have about this lens. It would be nice if this was a fixed aperture, and it could even be, you know, I don't know, I wouldn't want it to be 5.6 all the way through, obviously, because I would like that I'm able to shoot at 4.5 at 100, but I don't like variable aperture lenses, and that's one downside to this lens that I have, and I wish there was some solution for that, but that's just, you know, sort of the case, because you're going from such a wide zoom range for such a relatively cheap price that it makes sense that that's what Canon went with, is a variable aperture. But that'd be my one complaint about this lens. And overall, I think that this is a perfect zoom lens for wildlife photography. I think that, you know, if you're going to have your 600 f4 as your main lens, this is your perfect backup lens. I think with those two lenses, you're set as a professional wildlife photographer. Seriously. Like this is a professional. There are many professionals who use this lens daily. If that puts that into perspective, this is a professional grade lens and is the perfect zoom lens for wildlife photography, and I have very little complaints about it. I love this lens. If you're looking to upgrade and get a better wildlife photography lens, a professional wildlife photography lens, but not break the bank and buy a $10,000 prime lens, I think this is your answer. This is your lens. This is a phenomenal wildlife photography lens. And that is my summed up thoughts on the Canon 100-400 Mark II lens for wildlife photography. So if you guys have stuck around through this whole review, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you guys have enjoyed this one. If you haven't already, please do not forget to like and comment down below. Let me know what you all thought. And most importantly, as always, subscribe to be entered for the 1,000 subscriber Manatee Swim giveaway video. And that's it, guys. With that, I will see you in the next video.